everyone, this is Lou Powell, and today I am joined by Marko Muellner, who is our leader of our CX acceleration team. Welcome, Marko.
Welcome, thank you for having me.
And our guest today is Jeff Gothelf, who is a coach, speaker, author, and consultant. Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Jeff.
My pleasure to be here, Lou. Thanks so much for having me.
Jeff is the author of a couple of books that he wrote with Josh Seiden, which are Lean UX and Sense and Respond. And he also wrote a book that is a part of his Sense and Respond press, Lean versus Agile versus Design Thinking, which is a great thing to dissect, and has a more recent project that he's working on, which is Forever Employable. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what you're up to with that, Jeff?
I'd love to. So I wrote a book called Forever Employable. This is what it looks like. And the subtitle is the key to the book. It says, How to Stop Looking for Work and Let Your Next Job Find You. You may wonder, well, why did you write a book about that? Because you've written about product management, you've written about design, you've written about agile, you've written about organizational agility and digital transformation. And the interesting thing is that I've incorporated all of those ideas into the way that I work. And one of the things that I continue to sense from the market, my market is my audience, is people regularly asking me, well, Jeff, how did you become a coach? How did you become a consultant? How did you get a book deal? How did you get that speaking gig? And those have been coming in regularly for years. And so I've been sensing that. And so this book is a response to that. So it'd be a little tongue in cheek about Sense and Respond, right? This book is a response to that feedback. It starts with my story, but shares lots of other people's stories about how to take your experience and your expertise and build a career safety net out of it, to build a reputation, recognized expertise, and an audience that begins to generate opportunities towards you instead of you having to chase them. And what I think people who know my work already will find is that the ideas in that book, at least the process of going about building that platform and that opportunity magnet, is product development. It's a lot about hypotheses and experimentation and sensing and responding, and there's solving problems for people. So lots of design thinking ideas in there as well. So it is related. It's just really an application of those ideas in a different context.
That's incredibly interesting. And it actually ties right into a lot of the things that Marko and I are trying to solve for when we approach things in the marketplace. Thing that I think everyone's trying to figure out is, as we just came through the pandemic, something that we were just talking about previously, there are companies that survived that very well. And there's companies that struggled through the pandemic and continue to struggle as they're looking at this transition in behaviors in the marketplace. What do you see as the major differences between the successful and the struggling?
So I think there's a lot of different things that have made the companies that have survived and even thrived in the pandemic successful at that. So let's talk about where they were prior to the pandemic, number one. So first of all, they were already en route to building organizational agility into their ways of working. They had the technical infrastructure in place. They had the ability to adjust how they were delivering products and services to market, and then more importantly, what they were delivering to market very, very quickly. They had an organization where there was enough motivation, incentive, and frankly, psychological safety for people to be creative and to be innovative, or at least they were en route to doing that. And so that when the time came to exercise those muscles, people were used to it already. There was already some practice behind it. And there wasn't that fear of coming up with an idea that's going to get smacked down or even reprimanded for that. But I think most importantly, the quality of an organization, of the organizations that have survived through the pandemic and those that have even thrived, is it's a quality of humility. And what's fascinating about that is I think a lot of folks misunderstand that word. I think you say humble to people, to say leaders have to be humble, or you have to have a culture of humility. And people take that the wrong way. I think a lot of folks see it as an abdication of leadership or an abdication of vision, right? We're not going to tell people what to do because we're humble. That's not the case at all, right? Humility simply says that I have a strong opinion about something. I have a strong opinion based on my experience and my expertise about how to run a business, what product we should ship, how to design the company, whatever it is, right? But in the face of evidence, or in the face of change and therefore new evidence, I'm willing to change my mind. That's it. That's what being humble is. And I think that organizations that have humble leadership are learning organizations, and they have that psychological safety that enables creativity and innovation. So when all of a sudden the way that you've always delivered your product and service is shut down literally overnight, well, you've got a lot of brains thinking about, well, how do we actually save the organization? And you've got a culture that encourages them to share those ideas. Yeah. And that's where I think that success came from.
The thinking led the changes and the production, right? So there was a lot of folks and a lot of clients that I worked with that were able to kind of change the thinking and get ahead of it and calm themselves down and readjust some metrics and kind of rethink how they were going to go to market. But the ability to actually kind of adjust the ship, as it were, and really start to change the way they actually got to market and delivered products, that took a while. That took to Q4, even into Q1 before they were really able to bring that out. And frankly, I'm still seeing that now, right? I think Apple released a product yesterday that like has a great video conference camera finally, right? Like it just like, the thinking can be there, but the actual means of production to change the way organizations actually function has been a little bit longer tail. Have you seen that too?
The mechanisms, the workflows, the processes are still rigid, even though I guarantee you put 1,000 people in a room and you ask them, how many of you are working in an agile environment? 999 hands go up. And then the one honest person in the back is going like this, moving their hands side to side, right? But nevertheless, there's still this idea of, well, I, as the boss, tell people what to do, they execute on it, they deliver it, and that takes time. And so it's one thing to have that continuous learning and that humble leadership. It's one thing to be able to ask people to be creative and innovative, but changing the wheels of production inside the organization is still an uphill battle in most companies, certainly the ones that I work with.
So there's this concept that we like to talk about at PK. We look at digital transformation, and we think that the messaging that digital transformation speaks about is this idea that I have to transform singularly. I move from something to something. But the challenges that we see in the marketplace are that it's not a transformation. It's many, many transformations, and it's many to come. And that the challenge to be solved for is this ability to continuously transform. So we call that the dynamic enterprise. It's being more dynamic in your approach to how you do things. And to the point that you bring up, the ideas that we look at when we talk about the dynamic enterprise is an intentionality of innovation and an intentionality of taking things and getting the most from the marketplace. And an intentionality of sunsetting those solutions. And there's a book by Ravi G called The 3-Box Solution that talks about this concept of going from creating the future to managing the present to forgetting the past. And we would add to that there's actually two parts of that managing the present, which is moving something intentionally from innovation to a product that can go to market and be production worthy. And then there's a completely separate concern for moving it from that stage to an enterprise-wide scaled solution. What are your thoughts on that idea that we need to be philosophically thinking of our business in these segregated purposes?
So I was just speaking with somebody yesterday about this, and it feels like this concept of innovation labs, and it was all the rage for a long time. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find like true innovation labs in most of large organizations, most of organizations these days. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is there's several reasons, right? So like you said, it's coming up with those creative ideas is one thing, and you can try to box that up and package that. But then you have to productize that. You have to take that to market, you have to take it out and broaden it. And it's that transition out of an innovation lab into the productization process where most of these ideas die. Those ideas typically don't see the light of day, they don't productize well, or they're simply conceived outside of product strategy that the whole organization is working on, that when you try to sort of shoehorn them into what the rest of the company is doing, it doesn't make sense. the other challenge with these innovation labs is that they're hoarding all of that good work process, right? It just kind of happens in this, it's not an ivory tower, but it's a tower of some color, right? And and it's the black turtleneck tower, right? Generally speaking, right? And all of that is held there, and the rest of the organization doesn't get any of that. Those are the main reasons that these innovation labs end up shutting down and then being absorbed back into the organization, right? And it's this idea that we want to democratize this process, and we want to create paths of least resistance for these ideas to go from a spark in somebody's brain to a prototype to production as quickly as possible. And I think that if you compartmentalize each one of those steps in that process, well, you're slowing it down and you're increasing the risk of death for those ideas.
So the idea that Google could become the Google startup that they once were and do things in the same way is false. They can't do today what they started out doing because they're a completely different enterprise. It's that idea, right? So the idea that innovation labs as a startup mentality can be brought into an enterprise and be successful is a fallacy.
And this is the thing that I think really hits home when I speak with leaders and executives about, well, why should you be thinking about software as the engine of your business, and software is continuous, and so all of this like fixed date, fixed scope, linear planning doesn't make sense anymore. And I always ask them this question. I said, when is Google done? Right? When is Netflix done? Or when is Amazon is like, all right, you know what? That's the best e-commerce experience it's ever going to be. We're going home, right? Turn off the lights, right? It's never, they're never done, right? And as soon as you ask that question, the light bulb goes on, right? They're like, oh, right, we're never done with this. And Google, they're never going to go back to being that kind of startup, but they're always going to strive to get better and to get smarter and to be more innovative and more creative. And that's what should terrify other organizations.
But they do have this new level of complexity on top of what they're doing that wasn't there originally, which is I've got existing customers and they've got existing products and they've employed them in such a fashion. And this new thing is going to impact revenue and customer satisfaction and behavior. So now there's a much more complex set of considerations inside of, what you're delivering. So does the scope become more product team oriented, or what do you think that scope becomes that's a healthy perspective?
Well, look, so I think context is everything in this case. And I think what you said is spot on, right? There are teams that are not going to strive for innovation, right? They're the BAU teams, the business as usual teams. Their mandate is not innovation. Their mandate is to keep things running, to keep things consistent, maybe to grow incrementally over time, right? And there are going to be teams whose mandate is innovation. I think both of those teams are responsible for looking at the way things are currently done and suggest opportunities for deprecation and lightening the load and reducing the debt that we continue to maintain with these legacy systems that have been in play for a long time. But the context of the team should determine how innovative or how creative they are, and the processes that the organization puts in place should enable those teams to move quickly and to learn quickly.
One of the things that we're noticing is similar to what you're talking about. When you're launching something brand new for the very first time, then the whole team is focused on innovation, iteration, pivoting, those things that are very innovation oriented. But once you find that we've got something that's more we've found our connectivity in the marketplace. We've started to mature the product perspective in the marketplace and the offering. We've started to get customers consuming it who are now dependent on it. Now there's this transition that needs to happen where innovation is not disrupting productivity. Does it make sense that both of these things need to exist? One, when a product is first coming off the ground, but then there needs to be a transition once you become more mature and start supporting an existing consumer base, that you now need to separate that function so you're not interrupting delivery with innovation, and you're able to focus delivery teams on all of the things that they need to be focused on, and innovation can still happen.
The learning never stops, or it shouldn't,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Let's be clear about that. Just because you found product market fit, because you began to scale it, just because you've got paying customers, and you're building a business around it, and it's sustainable, and it's a business you want to be in, it doesn't mean that the learning ever stops. It is a balance of maintaining the production and the delivery aspect of it while still enabling the teams to learn, and both culturally creating the slack for that to take place, as well as the systems that support that work.
How do you address big change in this framework, right? And then and that gets at this question of not just like we're going to get something and then figure out how to scale it, but how do we actually address big, whether it's moonshot stuff or big problems in our organization, by taking this smaller approach?
If you're measuring it in terms of outcomes, of key results, objectives and key results, and changes in customer behavior, then you set yourself a series of goals. And let's say you begin to hit those goals. Like you're doing well, you're hitting those goals. And at some point, the return on investment for continuing to follow the path that you followed up until this point starts to flatten out. So you're putting in the same amount of effort, but the return on that investment, as far as like changing customer behavior or acquiring new customers, is not coming back in the way that it used to. And I've been on teams that have reached that point. If you're successfully measuring your product that way, then you're getting a clear signal from the market that we need to do a reset here. There's something like we've done all we can with our current set of ideas, and we need to do a reset. In other words, kind of go back to first principles, go back to the first step. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? Is it different than the problem that we were trying to solve when we started down this path? Great. What does success look like now? Because we've achieved the success goals that we set out whenever we started. What does success look like moving forward? Now, how do we think we're actually going to get there? Is our do we need a different customer base, right? Do we need to provide different value to this customer base? Have their needs changed? Have their consumption patterns changed? I guarantee that happens all the time, right? And so it's a resetting of the problem space, and then a resetting of the milestones that can really help reset the project and drive the kind of innovation that unstalls these initiatives.
One of the readings that I thought was really interesting was Simon Wardley's perspective on pioneer settlers and town planners, where you look at it and say there are certain folks that are really good at, blue sky or greenfield, dream the impossible dream. And there's folks that are like, hey, I see your dream and I can make that real. And then there's folks that say, hey, that thing's real, but I can make it better and I can fine tune that thing. Does that seem to be something that plays in how we are working today inside of those product teams?
100%. I mean, and again, this comes back to how are we defining the role of this team? Is this an innovation team? Is this a team that requires innovative work, or is this a team that requires sort of the consistency of delivery and the predictability of the work itself, right? And I think that's important. And then hiring and staffing it appropriately. It's funny, you remind me of this really story from many years ago. But I was a musician in college, and after I was a touring musician for a long time. And I remember in college, and we played a lot of kind of improvisational music. Let's call it jam bands back then. And there was a guy we used to play with, and he was the guy's name was Winston, and Winston was a guitar major at school. So he was majoring in classical performance of guitar. And if you put sheet music in front of Winston, he could play the heck out of it. He was so good. He was perfect. He had the technique down. He knew how to deliver that thing. If you gave him the spec, he could deliver the product, right? Mm-hmm. And then every weekend or so, we would have kind of these open mic jams in somebody's basement or some party or whatever it is. And every now and again, Winston would show up, and he would try to sit in, and it was impossible for him to sit in. He couldn't figure out what to play, when to play, how to fit in with everybody, because the spec wasn't in front of him, right? No one told him what to play. And so I think that's a really clear illustration of having the right personality in the right situation, right? So innovative teams are creative, improvisational teams that listen and learn and adjust course from each other. In those situations, people who need a spec to follow don't do well. People who need a recipe don't do well. However, in a very well-defined, clear performance situation, where someone has to basically deliver a thing that's already been defined by somebody else with very little variation, right? There are people who can execute that to a T. And so that's where people like Winston really fit, right? People who can read the script and follow the script. And so it's really important, I think, to recognize that. What situation is this? And then hire for that role and make sure that you've got the right people in the right places.
How do you see incentivization positively or negatively impacting the performance of teams?
Inevitably, people are going to optimize their behavior for what gets them paid. And so if I get a bonus, if I get a promotion, then I am going to do the thing that gets me that bonus and promotion, rather than, you might ask me to behave differently, but ultimately, if that's not going to get me my bonus or my promotion, I'm not going to do it. Incentives are absolutely crucial. And it's a terrifying prospect for most organizations, especially large ones, because they have so much historical inertia behind the performance management criteria that they have today, behind the incentive plans, behind what they celebrate, that changing that is such a radical shift. Number one, it's big change, it's scary. Second, for any employee that's been in the organization for a while, let's say you've been in there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years or more, if you suddenly change the performance management criteria, you are moving the goalposts for those folks. And you may not be moving them further away. You may be moving them completely laterally to a place that they don't know how to get to. And so there's this fear that we're going to lose a significant chunk of folks who all of a sudden are going to be like, hey, I've spent 15 years targeting the corner office and that job title, right? And I've been doing everything you've told me to do, and now you're going to change everything, right? And I can't get my corner office and my job title anymore. And that's terrifying for organizations. But I've yet to really find or read about an organization that has put together incentives and performance management criteria that truly reward people and encourage the kind of humility, learning, creativity, innovation, psychological safety that we've been talking about here today. These are the agility, right? These are different metrics, right? It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to say to the team, hey, Jeff, did you write 1,000 lines of code? Right? Yeah, I wrote 1,000 lines of code. Okay, you produced code. That means you get paid and you get promoted, right? Did anybody use those lines of code? Did they add value to the customer? Did they make anybody more successful? Well, that's not what you're asking me to do, right? And that measurement is a lot. It's a lot more difficult to get at, right? Did you produce the thing is binary. Right. And so it's easy to measure, right? Did you produce the thing? Yes, I produced it. Terrific. You get your bonus and your promotion. No, you didn't. You don't get your bonus and your promotion. And so I'm still looking for a shining example of an organization that's done that. But this is the final frontier. And I feel like we've talked about and uncovered sort of broadly the technology, infrastructure, organizational design, vocabulary, physical workspaces, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the final frontier here is incentives. And it's the thing that's going to make or break this ultimately.
Thanks for the great conversation, Jeff Gothelf. Appreciate your time today, man.
My pleasure. It was a blast speaking with both of you. Thank you so much for having me.